Okay, happy Valentine's Day, everybody. We are going to draw a putti today by Francois Boucher, the French artist, active during the 1700s. And this is a study. He put a lot of putties in his paintings. Putties are a favorite of classical artists. And this is going to be really challenging because this is a great little gesture. And it's really one of the first figure drawings we're doing this year. So we're going to start by by thinking through the volumes. This head is tipped down, and because it's a baby, the cranium is really big compared to the body. So let's try to capture that right from the start. And that would be my simplification of the head. I'm just trying to show the turn of the head and the line of the eyes. I'm going to go ahead and drop a little shadow under the nose and then maybe a little indication of the mouth. Very simplified, and maybe a little indication of the eye socket. And don't put a neck on this little fella because he doesn't have one. Yep, he's got a very... Babies have little necks to begin with, and in this pose, notice that his shoulder is coming up to a level that is, if we imagine a little horizontal line going across, so the shoulder comes up to a point between the eyes and the nose. So let's think of it that way, and we're going to think of it as a little ball. And this arm is very foreshortened because it's coming out towards us. Now, whenever we're trying to draw a foreshortened volume like this, we'll do better if we can think of it in terms of some geometric solids. So this is the ball of the shoulder. If we put another ball under it the same size, you see that's about how big the whole forearm is. And then if we put one more ball below that, that sort of gets us to the elbow. So don't draw what you think arms look like. Try to just draw this very shortened little form. And I would think of the forearm more in terms of like a box. You see that? It's like a box that is almost a square. And the right edge of the box kind of lines up with the left eye of the figure. So that means this should be all the way back here. And the fingers stay inside this line. This line I get from the cheek, and the fingers have to stay inside this line. I'm not going to draw them yet, but my whole hand has to stay inside of that. The hand comes up a little higher because this little pectoral muscle is very short in the drawing. And now I'm going to sketch the rib cage, which is tiny. There I would think about it in terms of an angle. You see how these front and back of the rib cage are kind of like parallel, and they're sloping at about 80 degrees, like that. And then there's a shift in direction because the pelvis tips forward, and it goes to about 45 degrees. So And this direction change happens above the height of the elbow. Kind of like that. And to keep this really simple, I'm just going to round off the back of the pelvis. And remember, this is what Proko calls the bean, this sort of bent form that's created by the pelvis and the rib cage. And most of us want to make it way too straight, so make sure you get that nice direction change there. I'm going to draw the spine. See that little indent there? That's going to show us that the pelvis is tipped towards us a little bit. And now I'm going to block in the actual contours here, simplifying them down to something like this. And notice that little indent for the spinal muscles sort of continues and forms the cleft of the baby's bottom. Right here we see the indent for the greater trochanter. And the femur, if you can read this, the femur is pretty much vertical. So we're going to build the thigh around a vertical like this. Make sure you make this leg short enough. It's really short because it's a baby. And this angle of the tibia, see how that kind of picks up the angle of the front of the rib cage? So that was about 80 degrees, and this is also about the same, which according to some authorities, something that the great artists always did was try to emphasize these similar angles throughout the figure. And it certainly helps anytime you can find similar angles, it helps to notice them. It helps you start to see things that are not right next to each other in the drawing, which is the main mistake people make when figure drawing, is they just look at, they draw the foot, then they compare the position of the foot to the lower leg, and then they work their way up. And they're never comparing the angle of the leg to the angle of the rib cage. These are distal elements, and we want to always get in the habit of comparing not just proximal things, but distal things. Distal, if you haven't already figured it out, is an anatomical term for the things that are farther away from the center line or from another reference point, and proximal are the things that are closer. If I take a construction line from the bottom to the foot, that's a little shallower than these lines, but not too much. And that'll help me find where to put this little foot. And if you find yourself drawing this with too much like adult proportions, that's completely normal to do before you've studied, juvenile bodies. During the Renaissance, famously, artists would always draw the children like little miniature adults, and but their proportions are very different. How many heads tall do you think this baby is? Well, more than 3, but yeah, 4 or 5 heads tall. And as you know, an average human adult is closer to 7 or 8 heads tall. So, so the errors that your brain is going to want to make all involve making the limbs too long, or making the head too small, or both. So the last thing we're going to block in before I come around and check your work is this ear, which is really going to help a lot to suggest the tilt downward of the head. And we're going to block in the hair too, just to give a sense of how big this head is. And while we're at it, let's just do a really quick shadow map. Let me get rid of these marks, and we're going to shadow map down the side of the forehead. Little shadow, this eye socket. Just try to draw this line along with me so you don't get lost. We're going to shadow map the side of the shoulder. And another piece of shadow under the arm. This one comes up around the pelvis. There's a shadow above the trochanter of the femur, and then a rounded shadow along the thigh. And this basically looks like a bunch of nonsense information until we do a really quick first shading, and that's going to help us a lot to assess our work. So remember, if you're right-handed, you're going to go the opposite direction of what you see me doing. And we're just going to lay in a tone, covering the side of the face, the chest, the stomach up to the pelvis, and this side of the thigh, and this side of the lower leg. And notice how much that first shading helps you read the gesture and read the pose. And this is the time in the drawing when, after first shading, where you want to start making your corrections. So what I'm seeing in my drawing right now is this needs to come up a little more, and I probably need to show a little more like the other eye socket. Still don't quite have enough tip of the downward of the head, but we'll get into that when we do the features. So I want you all to stop and watch me for a minute. Can you see how the gesture of my little putti is not bad, but it really feels like his head's not tipped down enough. And I couldn't see that when all I had was a line drawing. But now that I've did that first shading, I'm really reading a pretty major error in my drawing. So watch how I fix it. I haven't committed to anything yet. I'm just taking these little shapes of shadow and bumping them down a little. And then I'm going to take another step back and see if it reads more correctly, which I think it already does. Is everyone seeing that? It's like, so the big idea here is that if you get in, like most of you want to get in way too soon with a lot of details, at this stage of the drawing, before I've committed to anything, I can change that pose in a second. But if I had done a really nice job with the nose and the eyes and all that stuff, it would have been a lot more trouble to make that correction. And you know what? I probably wouldn't have bothered with it. You know, once you draw the beautiful little features, you really are not going to be too inclined to change them if the gesture is not working right. And then you're just kind of stuck with them. So hopefully each and every one of you will be able to see, if not that error, then some error in your drawing, and you'll be able to make the correction at this stage without any reworking of details. It's just a matter of moving these little shapes of halftone around the surface of the drawing until it reads correctly. And it's like I have said 1,000 times, it's just really hard to read the drawing before you've identified any shadow shapes. So what I always like to do at this point, ready or not, is to get into more detail on the face. It's a really interesting portrait. Okay. So I'm going to switch to Boucher's shading direction. Boucher seems to have been right-handed, but I'm going to switch to that for my second shading just so I can sort of study what Boucher was doing with line. Babies have very shallow, the bridge of their nose is not developed, so their eyes are kind of shallow set. And I'm going to sharpen my pencil so that I can draw this nose the way I see it. Tiny little nostril. And there's a subtle little darkening along the bottom of this cheek. And here's the upper lip. Now, look at how far to the left. This mouth is not centered under the nose. It's bumped over to the left because of the angle of the face. And the bottom lip goes down all the way to the top of the chin. You see that? The chin is very small because it's a baby again. Babies have very small chins and jaws, so they don't have to really chew yet. And look at how full this cheek is. It's really here's this little shadow inside the eye socket. And we can see Boucher has drawn the iris and the pupil. It's all buried in shadow, so it's hard to see, but we can see which way the baby's looking, sort of off to our right. And on the other side, so you see I'm really getting definite with my features now, but that's because I was happy with the way the pattern of light and dark was reading. You don't want to like jump into this first and then sort of color it in. I had already established this eye socket as a shadow shape, and now I'm drawing the eye inside it, and it's fitting well enough. It's not perfect, but that's about as good as I'm going to do today. The nose is going to be always surprisingly small in a baby. And because this cheek is just as large, notice though it's covered by the shoulder and even by the collarbone. See, here's the collarbone, and here's the curve of the shoulder. So we need to make it clear. These overlaps need to be clear. We need to show that the cheek is disappearing behind the shoulder, behind the collarbone, and then the chin is sort of overlaying the other side of the collarbone, moving down to the pectoralis. And I already placed that ear. I'm feeling like my ear's crowding the cheek just a little, so I'm going to just move that line back a tiny bit. And just look how clear the structure is on that ear. That's pretty amazing. There's the helix. No real tragus to speak of, but here's this shadow here is the antihelix. Some really nice simplifications going on in these forms. It's like you just barely touch the drawing, but as long as you do what Boucher did, it's going to be legible. I'm just going to throw in some of those curly lines to show some tousled hair. And notice all the darks in the hair are clustering over to the right side of the head. So one thing I'm noticing in my drawing is I need a little bit of light between the back of this ala here and this labial fold here, which is the crease at the bottom of the cheek. I was sort of, there's a little internal highlight between those two forms that I was completely missing. It was kind of screwing up my drawing. And I also want to throw the bottom of this cheek into some shadow. I think that looks a lot better. Okay. Really make sure you get a sense that this shoulder is like pressing up over the cheek. And we're going to slide down a little. And here's where we get into all these little fat folds. Well, it's baby fat. It's this drawing is sort of an object lesson in the idea that we're at the termination point of every crease in the human body, you're going to end in a little Y shape. You're not going to just end abruptly, and there's a lot of these little Y shapes all over this drawing where the crease ends and you get this little bifurcation. And notice this is not a heavy or continuous outline. Like this line doesn't really meet this one. The variation in line weight on these outlines is so well controlled. It's sort of another marvel of this drawing. It's just the way the line weight of every contour kind of ebbs and flows, getting thick and thin, and how expressive those variations are. A lot of us just sort of default to a consistent line weight on our outlines, which is just as bad as if you played the piano and you just hit every note with the same intensity. You had no dynamic range. That would be a very bad thing for a piano player, and it's a very bad thing for drawing as well. Right here, this break behind the shoulder is due, of course, to the fact that this is a winged putti. It's how we're celebrating Valentine's Day. We don't see a lot of winged putties in real life. So Boucher undoubtedly made this up. But let's throw a little wing on there. It is a weird tradition in art, the putti. It's we have a healthy and understandable prohibition against doing what we call eroticizing children. But it's kind of fascinating that the word eroticize comes from Eros, who is literally a baby. He's not a baby? Yeah, right. Yeah, I know. He grows up in the myth.
Does that mean he's a love child?
Okay. Finch, you make an excellent point. Well, for Valentine's Day, though, he's always represented as a baby, and that's like a. So here's this little fold of cloth that's overlapping part of his abdomen. He's really a chubby little baby, so this is hanging, his belly's kind of hanging down. I'm not shaming him, I'm just. Here's another example of this Y fork. Does everyone know what I mean by a Y shape? You see that? It's like very dark bifurcation, and it corresponds to the way this shadow edge is moving. This plane change here is at the top of the pelvis. There's a lot of reflected light kind of flooding the little abdomen here. There's kind of a little dimpling in the front of the thigh. See that little. And I'm going to throw in a little dark behind this to make it read more like it reads in the original. And now we move on to the So just do the best you can with all these details. Notice there's a little suggestion here at the top of the cleft of another little Y fold. And there's a strong reflected light inside between the cheeks. Can you see what I'm talking about right here? So you've got to go really dark on the core shadow here. And here you can see why we spend so much time drawing eggs, because it's the same pattern we find all the time in these rounded forms of a core shadow, reflected light, and a little darkening of the cast shadow right under there. And then we go down a level and we find the same thing. form shadow with a core shadow along the top, a little core cast shadow underneath. And finally, one more time right above the knee. Whoops. I missed a whole fold there. There's this, you can see just a little bit of that thigh, which I didn't really include in my original sketch. And another surprising thing with infant proportions is the size of the hands and feet. And we can see this foot is really, really small. So don't enlarge it. And notice this first toe kind of curls up, and the other one, second toe is behind it. Amazing little gesture, even down to the level of the feet here. And you can see Boucher is definitely doing a little bit of smudging, but he's not smudging in place of hatching. Can you see how clear the hatching is? He's just sort of smudging in addition to hatching. And you can try that too if you want, but it doesn't relieve you of the responsibility of hatching these forms. And here's another one of those little Y folds right here. The little flat plane under, right behind the knee. There's the curve of the calf muscle. And that really kind of fullness around the ankle. And notice how the kneecap curves up and around and disappears behind the thigh muscle there. See this little overlap? That's very important. And finally, this last foot, also very small. I'm not quite as clear with the toes on this one. I'm sure you're all perfectly aware that Boucher did not have access to any cameras. And yeah, he must have seen some naked babies for sure. But you also, if you've ever known a baby, you know, they don't really sit still for you. So there's a lot of invention in this drawing, is what I'm saying. Like you can't ask a baby to pose for you. And if you don't have a camera, you can't get the shot that captures this pose. So he just watched babies and
What if it was a dead baby? What if he like posed and taxidermied a dead baby?
okay. We're still live here, Max, and we're recording this lesson. And, you know, for my viewers, you know, I don't think they want to hear your theories about taxidermying babies. No, taxidermying babies was not acceptable practice even in the 1700s. Yeah, we're sure we would have heard about it. No, the point is Boucher invented this. He would have sat and done a lot of studies of babies from life, living babies crawling around, and then he created this masterpiece based really mainly on his knowledge of what they looked like. Okay, time to zoom out again. Let's see how we're doing here. So we've got, I totally forgot about this other wing. And we have 4 minutes to finish, so please do your best to finish these drawings and take pictures of them. The assignment will be created next time we meet, but save your drawing or take a picture of it. You don't need to put your stuff away yet. Just going to draw this little hand. Again, the fingers are tiny because it's a baby. And finally, notice this baby seems to be casting a shadow onto the wall or something, which makes him look a little more airborne. And has a little bit of cloth flowing gracefully behind. Once again, thanks at home for watching. It's going to do it for our putti. And we'll see you next time.